had just come of age when I took a knife for the crown prince, saving his life. The emperor was overjoyed and granted a marriage, asking for my name. My father hurried forward, respectful and proud, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty, this is my daughter, Ivy-shan." And so, Ivy-shan took my place and married the crown prince. And I married the unfavored second prince. On the wedding night, the crown prince went to his beloved concubine. Ivy-shan was left alone in the bridal chamber, becoming the laughingstock of the palace. And on my wedding night, I conceived the eldest grandson of the great Xia dynasty. A year later, the crown prince died under mysterious circumstances. Ivy-shan climbed into the old emperor's bed, infuriated the empress to death, and was banished to the cold palace. With the crown prince gone and the eldest grandson born, the second prince gained much favor from the emperor. When the barbarians invaded, the second prince led the troops into battle, defeated the barbarians in one fell swoop, and was promoted to crown prince. And I became the virtuous and praised crown princess, the perfect helpmate. On the day he was crowned emperor, as the empress, I pardoned my sister, who had been confined to the cold palace, at my father's desperate plea. When we met again, her face was weathered, her eyes filled with a chilling glare. "Why are you the empress? I am the one destined by fate." After saying this, she lunged at me without a hint of hesitation, thrusting a dagger fiercely into my heart. Bleeding profusely, I used the last of my strength to strike her down from the city wall with a single palm, but the husband who protected me whispered softly in my ear, "My dear queen, farewell on your journey. One reborn to seize the throne." When I opened my eyes again, it was the moment my family was plotting to take away my wealth and status. Ivy-shan, the legitimate daughter of the Shan family, is both virtuous and talented. She risked her life to save the crown prince, and her contributions are undeniable. She especially granted marriage to the crown prince. Zara-shan, the illegitimate daughter of the Shan family, is granted marriage to the second prince. A single stroke of the sword brought 2 marriage proposals, and father was overjoyed holding the imperial decree. Clearly, it was a marriage I earned with my life. Yet father intends to have Ivy-shan take my place, hoping she can become the queen of the nation. "Father, I won't change. I will marry the second prince." Ivy-shan suddenly started shouting loudly. "It turns out, she has also been reborn. In my previous life, my father and stepmother made me and my sister swap identities, causing me to marry the incompetent second prince and ultimately die tragically at the hands of Ivy-shan. In this new life, I will definitely reclaim everything that belongs to me." Nonsense. The crown prince was born of the empress. Marrying him would be the fate of an empress, a life of fortune. The second prince, born of a palace maid, was never favored. Marrying such a person would only lead to mistreatment in the palace, leaving you with nothing but a life of hardship. Father and stepmother couldn't bear to see Ivy-shan suffer, so they scolded her harshly. "Yet in my past life, it was I who married the second prince," they said. "Marrying the second prince is already reaching above your station. You grew up in the countryside. Your character isn't fit for the crown prince, unlike Ivy-shan, who is a talented woman. Father, the crown prince is frail and sickly. If it weren't for Zara-shan saving his life, he wouldn't have survived until now. Although the second prince is not favored, he is still the emperor's son and could inherit the throne in the future." Ivy-shan whispered in her stepmother's ear for a while. The stepmother's face turned pale and then flushed with anger. She bit her lip, as if making up her mind about something, then turned and murmured in father's ear. I watched them whispering secretly and quietly finished a pot of tea. The matter was put on hold because of Ivy-shan. After some time had passed, a flood indeed broke out in Qingju. Father, having heeded Ivy-shan's words, made preparations in advance and managed to hold back the flood's devastation. Not only did this prevent the people from being displaced, but it also earned him the emperor's praise. As a result, father was honored with the title of Duke of Zhengguo, and stepmother became a first-rank lady of the court. They became even more convinced of Ivy-shan's prophecies. Father brought up the matter of the arranged marriage again. He said, "Zara, you should marry the crown prince. Don't forget you're using Ivy's identity. Be careful not to give yourself away." I nodded obediently and said calmly, I am willing to marry the crown prince, but I want a grand wedding procession stretching for 10 miles. You're asking for the moon. Your father is only a third-rank military officer. Where would he get so much silver to prepare all that? Besides, Ivy also needs to prepare her dowry. My stepmother looked rather flustered and exasperated. I hadn't expected her to lose her composure so easily, come to think of it. It makes sense. My stepmother loves money so much. How could she be willing to spit out what she's already swallowed? I put down the teacup and glared, saying, "Then return my mother's dowry to me." If I hadn't lived through a past life, I wouldn't have known how much dowry my mother brought when she married my father. In my previous life, Ivy Shun flaunted in front of me on her wedding day, marrying the crown prince in grand style with my mother's lavish dowry. My father even advised me to be generous, saying, "Ivy Shun is marrying the crown prince, we must show respect to the royal family." When it came to my turn to marry the crown prince, there was nothing left. My stepmother was a bit shocked. "How did you know? My maternal grandfather was a royal merchant. How could the dowry compare to that of a mere county magistrate's daughter? You know very well what's in the treasury." I looked at my father with dissatisfaction. His eyes were evasive. And he did not deny it, trying to gloss things over by saying, "You must consider your sister." With a determined look in my eyes, I threatened, "What if I tell the emperor that it was me who blocked the blade, not Ivy Shun? How about that?" Father finally showed his true colors and became furious. "Are you trying to get yourself killed? If you betray us, you won't escape either. At worst, we'll all perish together." In my past life, I always held on to that tiny bit of father-daughter affection, believing that father truly cared for me. It wasn't until later that I realized it was nothing but repeated exploitation. I said it very calmly. Perhaps they saw my resolve, or perhaps they were thinking of how to scheme against me. But they actually fell silent for a moment, until Ivy Shun spoke up generously. "Father, mother, just give that dowry to my sister. I'm going to be the empress in the future. So I don't need that little bit. Be the empress." I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, thank you, sister." Ivy Shun looked at me with dissatisfaction and sneered. "Let me tell you, Zara Shun, marrying the crown prince is no good thing. The crown prince already has someone he loves. You won't receive any favor." I thought to myself, isn't that still better than the second prince, that freeloading snake who bites the hand that feeds him? If Ivy Shun knew that aside from his decent appearance, the second prince was nothing but a weak and useless man, she definitely wouldn't be laughing. In my previous life, if I hadn't put on the mask and fought alongside him, how could the second prince have repelled the barbarians? In this era where a husband's status is paramount, how could a woman's prominence overshadow her husband's glory? Sadly, after all the effort I put into securing a kingdom for him, the second prince ultimately betrayed me and dealt me the final blow. Too misplaced marriage. Storm of fate. I got married on the same day as Ivy Shun. On the day of the wedding, I smoothly received my dowry and had a grand and glorious marriage. The crown prince's betrothal gifts were truly abundant. In my previous life, I truly envied Ivy Shun. The gold, the silver, the jade, carried in chest after chest, as if they were cabbages. This stroke of heavenly fortune has finally come to me effortlessly, without having to lift a finger, just like in the previous life. The second prince still only sent 2 boxes of cheap goods, ordinary calligraphy and paintings and simple jewelry. After all, he is not favored and has nothing impressive to offer. Ivy Shun's face visibly turned ashen. Who told her to insist on marrying the second prince? Sister, what's there to be proud of in your husband's possessions? It's what you earn yourself that truly counts. The stepmother chimed in from the side, thanks to Ivy's cleverness. This flood not only got father and mother promoted but also earned a lot of silver. It really brings honor to them. Ivy Shun was extremely proud. My dowry was earned by myself. Ivy Shun's dowry was similar to mine. Even the wedding dress and phoenix crown were extremely alike. The wedding dress is made of gold-threaded cloud brocade, embroidered with eastern pearls and jade. The phoenix crown is a gold-threaded phoenix, inlaid with pearls and gemstones. I looked and finally understood. They really made a fortune from this flood, but I'm not the least bit envious. I only took what I deserved. The crown prince did not come to fetch the bride. It is said that he has not yet fully recovered and should avoid exertion. I remember when I blocked the knife, he fainted but was not injured. Can't make it, on purpose. Isn't it? The second prince, however, showed up looking quite presentable. Ivy Shun was even more delighted. The welcoming party for the crown prince consisted of military generals, his confidant Han Lin, and the palace matrons. The swaying sedan chair made me dizzy, and I nearly vomited several times. It rocked and jolted all the way to the crown prince's residence, the Eastern Palace. Inside, the room was magnificently decorated, with countless rare treasures and priceless artifacts. The inner chamber was filled with a sweet, intoxicating incense, just sitting by the bed. I felt as if I were floating in ecstasy. That wave of dizziness just now has passed. When the crown prince lifted my veil, I was still immersed in the fragrance of the room, finding it a bit hard to snap out of it. The crown prince was also quite handsome, with sharp eyebrows and starry eyes, a perfect description for him. I am also quite good-looking, with fair skin and beauty, and the teardrop mole at the corner of my right eye adds a touch of sensuality. The crown prince is a decent match for me. Sitting together on the edge of the bed, the crown prince visibly paused when our eyes met. You're Zara Shun, not Ivy Shun. I was also taken aback. How did you recognize me so quickly? Ivy Shun and I look almost identical, with the only difference being the teardrop mole at the corner of my eye. Only our family members can usually tell us apart. Why could the crown prince recognize me at a glance? The crown prince stared at me for a few moments, pondered briefly, then reached out to touch the teardrop mole at the corner of my eye and murmured to himself, "It's real." A warm breath brushed against my face, and a restless desire welled up in his eyes. I found myself anticipating his next move. The crown prince curled his lips into a smile. Ivy Shun doesn't have a teardrop mole on her right eye. It's Zara Shun who has it. I touched the teardrop mole at the corner of my eye, feeling puzzled. How did the crown prince come to know this detail? Forget it. I have no intention of operating under the name Ivy Shun. I quickly knelt down and said softly, "Your Highness, please forgive me. I am indeed Zara Shun." The crown prince, however, was not angry. He gently lifted my chin, lost in thought, and said, "The Duke of Zhengguo, substituting the fake for the real, sending you a daughter of a concubine. Here, what is his intention? By the emperor's decree, the legitimate daughter of the Shun family is to be wed. I am indeed the legitimate daughter of the Shun family. My mother was the legal wife, though she passed away early. My father favored the concubine over his wife, so I was sent to the countryside since childhood. By chance, I took a knife for your highness. I lifted my sleeve, revealing the long, slender scar on my arm. The crown prince glanced coldly and said, "Do you know this counts as deceiving the emperor?" I shook my head and explained. The emperor arranged the marriage mainly because of the merit in saving his majesty. That person was indeed me. The name reported was my father's, so how could I be accused of deceiving the emperor? The crown prince smiled faintly and said, "Quite the silver tongue." The crown prince did not fly into a rage, nor did he press the matter further. As I had expected, he did not care who the crown princess was. I seized the opportunity to continue. "I wish to propose a deal with your highness." The crown prince was surprised. "Oh, what kind of deal? I know your highness is fond of consort Bai and wishes to be with her alone for a lifetime. I am willing to unconditionally cooperate with you, acting as the nominal crown princess. I seek no favor or affection, only to be granted freedom once you ascend the throne." He frowned, puzzled. "Why? This palace is a devouring place, filled with endless strife. I only wish to change my identity after everything is over. Find a place to settle down, and live a peaceful life." The crown prince remained silent for a long time. Seeing that he had no intention of asking further, I breathed a sigh of relief, but he made me kneel for a long time. He sat by the bedside, watching me intently. My heart was racing with 100 galloping horses. Yet I dared not move, my knees occasionally protesting in discomfort. "After all, I am a woman too. Couldn't you be a bit more considerate?" After a long pause, the crown prince finally said slowly, "Get up." He patted the edge of the bed, signaling for me to sit. I timidly took a seat to the side, thinking to myself, Why hasn't he gone to find his beloved concubine yet? The crown prince grinned mischievously and said, I don't agree. The Duke of Zhengguo submitted the wrong name, which is deceiving the emperor, and you, by concealing it, are equally guilty. Even if you have the merit of saving me, death may be spared, but punishment is inevitable. You have no equal bargaining chip to trade with me. Your only choice is to obediently stay by my side as the crown princess, and I will protect you. It's said that the crown prince is of mediocre talent. But that must be a rumor. The one before me doesn't seem easy to fool. I was so shocked I was at a loss for words. In my previous life, the crown prince didn't care about the crown princess's life or death at all. Why is your highness protecting me? I was anxious and puzzled. Why is this crown prince so different from the previous life? The crown prince laughed heartily. Isn't that obvious? Because you saved me. I relaxed a bit. This crown prince still has some conscience. Would you like me to stay? The crown prince asked gently. The fragrance in the room grew increasingly rich. Somehow, I began to feel warm. And the warmth turned into restlessness. Looking at him, I felt a strange sense of quenching my thirst. Unconsciously, I moved closer and blurted out the truth. Are you up for it? After all, the crown prince in my previous life died on the bed of his beloved, and I wonder if he was exhausted to death. I quickly covered my mouth, but it seemed too late. The crown prince was visibly angry. His eyebrows were even contorted. Who told him to be so weak? Poor me, I couldn't even ask. The night is short and sweet, lasting until dawn. I think the crown prince might have a bit of a thing for me, right? At least in terms of appearance, he seems quite satisfied. I vaguely heard the nanny urging us to serve tea. The moment I tried to get up, the crown prince pushed me back down and coldly snapped, Don't bother. I dare not move anymore. Anyway, I'm sleepy. Half an hour later, the crown prince and I slowly arrived at the entrance of the empress's palace. Riding together in a palanquin, Ivy Shun and the second prince had actually been waiting at the palace entrance for half an hour, yet the empress still hadn't summoned us. As I stepped down from the palanquin, Ivy Shun was glaring at me with gritted teeth. I could understand her anger. After all, in the previous life, Ivy Shun had walked alone to offer tea and was punished by the empress to stand at the door for 2 hours. It was the crown princess's fault for failing to keep the crown prince on their wedding night, and both the second prince and I, having successfully handed over the handkerchief, were not troubled by the empress. A matron from the palace came out and said that the empress was summoning us. The empress said that bearing offspring was the most important matter for us newlyweds at the moment. The crown prince said discontentedly, but that doesn't mean mother can burn incense in my palace. The empress smiled faintly. Consort Bai suffers from uterine coldness and is not suited for bearing children. I know you favor her, but producing heirs is also your duty as the crown prince. Ivy Shun and I exchanged a knowing glance, finally understanding why we were irresistibly drawn to the crown prince. The difference was, Ivy Shun was rejected by the crown prince, while I successfully consummated the marriage. But how did Ivy Shun from the previous life resolve the issue on her wedding night? The anger in Ivy Shun's eyes grew stronger, and the air of resentment thickened, likely also thanks to the second prince's 5-minute performance in bed. After all, the second prince had long been worn out by the palace maids and eunuchs. In my past life, the imperial physicians said I had a body prone to pregnancy, which was how I conceived that child. Ivy Shun's experience last night probably wasn't as wonderful as she had imagined. The crown prince's reaction was rather indifferent. It wasn't that he truly intended to hold the empress accountable. Your highness is truly fortunate. I am far from matching you. The second prince rarely spoke up. He seldom voiced his opinions. The crown prince let out a cold laugh. How were you last night, my brother? The second prince smiled weakly and looked at Ivy Shun. Zara is very hardworking. Ivy Shun, however, became shy and even covered her face with a handkerchief. The queen looked at the handkerchief and was overjoyed. The emperor is hoping for an heir. The imperial astronomer said that the Shun family's daughter has the appearance of a phoenix and is sure to bear a dragon's son. You too must put in more effort. I await your good news. No wonder I had such good fortune in my previous life, sailing smoothly through the royal family. It was all thanks to my fertile womb. I just don't know if Ivy Shun has such good fortune. The Empress invited us to dine together. The imperial cuisine was exceptionally delicious, and I was thoroughly enjoying myself halfway through the meal. Suddenly, Ivy Shun stood up and said, "I would like to entertain Her Majesty the Empress by performing a song and dance that I designed myself." Ivy Shun's singing voice was naturally beautiful, as melodious as an oriole, and her dance was equally captivating. But I can hardly hold back the chopsticks in my hand. I really want to throw them out, thinking, what is Ivy Shun doing? Is she afraid that others won't know she's Ivy Shun? The Queen praised, "I never expected Zara's singing and dancing to be so impressive." Ivy Shun said shyly, "Sister, you're even better." She deliberately looked at me. "Right, sister, I'm busy eating the pork knuckle and feeling a bit displeased, so you're just here to watch me make a fool of myself." Unfortunately, Ivy Shun's plan backfired. "I'm not falling for her tricks," I replied truthfully. "I only enjoy wielding swords and spears. I'm not skilled in dance or music." The second prince laughed. "Everyone says Ivy Shun is both beautiful and talented in the Xia dynasty. So how could you not know? I've heard Zara Shun is skilled in martial arts. Could it be that you're not Ivy Shun?" I thought to myself. The second prince is asking so directly. Could it be that he also noticed Ivy Shun isn't Zara Shun? The crown prince stepped forward without hesitation. "Your son has something to report. Last night, the brides were mistakenly switched. My crown princess is Zara Shun, not Ivy Shun." The crown prince is so blunt, completely disregarding my well-being. I put down the pork knuckle in my hand, walked to the front of the hall, and knelt down, following the crown prince's words. When we were getting married, my sister and I were dressed very similarly. I nearly tripped before leaving, and in the chaos, my sister and I ended up in the wrong positions. The Empress was furious, slamming the table. "Since the bride was wrong, why wasn't she replaced immediately? And you even consummated the marriage." I, Ivy Shun, and the second prince all knelt down, not daring to speak. "Wasn't that all thanks to you, Mother?" The aphrodisiac incense was so strong, and it wasn't until after the deed was done that we woke up and realized the bride was wrong. The crown prince spoke bluntly, showing no regard for the Empress's dignity. I just thought the prince was blaming the Empress, but it turns out he was actually clearing my name and setting a trap for Her Majesty. The prince is indeed clever. Last night, in the heat of passion, he only told me to cooperate with him and just be myself. Her Majesty's imposing aura has diminished quite a bit, and she seems somewhat embarrassed. She probably didn't expect her good intentions to backfire, she sighed. "Since things have come to this, let's make the best of a bad situation. I will report this matter to the Emperor. From today onward, the Crown Princess shall be Zara Shun." I happily kowtowed deeply. I thank Her Majesty the Empress for her benevolence. Ivy Shun overreached herself, and she was quite frightened just now. But she was also happy, relieved that she did not use the name Zara Shun, dreaming of her future as a queen. Ivy Shun and I effortlessly reclaimed our identities. When I return home tomorrow, I will no longer be Ivy Shun. 3. The pain of severing ties. On the day of returning to my parents' home, the Crown Prince said he had matters to attend to and couldn't accompany me. He had Han Lin bring generous gifts and go with me to the Shun family. Ivy Shun stood at the door and, seeing that I had come alone, laughed so hard she nearly doubled over. "Sister, has the Crown Prince abandoned you?" I walked past her without wanting to pay her any attention. Han Lin, take the return gifts to my father's place. Ivy Shun watched Han Lin bring out the lavish gifts, gritting her teeth in anger, and shouted, "Zara Shun, don't get too cocky too soon." I went directly to the Shun family ancestral hall, leaving her to talk to herself. I knelt before my mother's memorial plaque, bowing in gratitude for her love and care in raising me. Ivy Shun stormed in, took down my mother's plaque, threw it heavily to the ground, stomped on it a few times, and looked triumphant. "You won't be the crown princess for long, no need to inform the concubine." I snatched the plaque from under her feet in anger, but my hands were trampled until they were covered in bloody marks. Upon closer inspection of the plaque, I realized that my wife had been changed to concubine. I angrily asked my father, "What is going on?" My father said with conviction, "Ivy is destined to be the empress and needs the status of a legitimate daughter." Since you won't be the crown princess for much longer anyway, why not just give in to your sister? I was furious and heartbroken. I pulled out Han Lin's sword, cut off my sleeve, and said in utter despair, "Today, I sever ties by cutting my robe. From this day forward, I have nothing to do with the Shen family." No one expected that the crown prince would suddenly arrive with an imperial edict at this moment. The Duke of Zhengguo sold flood information to grain merchants in advance, causing rice prices to rise and profiting from the crisis, violating the principles of governance and disappointing the people. The evidence is conclusive, and the crime is unforgivable. However, considering his contributions to disaster relief, the Shen couple is hereby sentenced to confiscation of property and exile to the northern wastelands. My father and stepmother wept bitterly, kneeling and begging me to plead for mercy on their behalf. I lowered my head, pretending to shed tears, covering half my mouth with a handkerchief, and said with a heartless expression, "We've already severed ties." The stepmother then turned to Ivy Shen, grabbing her hand and pleading pitifully, "Ivy, help me beg for mercy. I don't want to be exiled." Ivy Shen had no choice but to glance at the second prince. The second prince immediately slapped the stepmother's hand away, his face full of disgust. "Ivy, your parents are beyond saving. The emperor already dislikes me. Pleading for them will only bring trouble." Ivy Shen hesitated, but fearing she might be implicated, she dared not speak and could only follow the second prince, slipping away without looking back. I asked the crown prince, "How did you know about my father selling information?" He was clearly very discreet about it. He said, "This matter has been under investigation for a while. But we never expected that the one embezzling money and the one aiding the distressed would turn out to be the same person. However, yesterday, when you mentioned that your attire was similar to Ivy Shen's, I realized something. Your wedding dress was custom-made and not the same as Ivy Shen's. What stood out were the emerald and eastern pearls on it, extremely valuable and far beyond what the Duke of Zhengguo's salary could afford. The wedding dress could be altered to look similar, but it required a considerable amount of silver, which made me suspicious, so I had someone investigate. I was quite surprised that he had picked up on the hidden meaning in my words at the time. By the time we returned to the Eastern Palace, it was already very late. As the Crown Prince and I stepped into the Eastern Palace, a palace maid hurried over to deliver a report. "Your Highness, it has been 3 days since you last visited our mistress. She misses you so much that she has lost her appetite and has been bedridden for several days. Please go and see her at once." The Crown Prince's expression remained unchanged. This consort Bai is the one who holds the Crown Prince's heart. I assumed the Crown Prince would go to consort Bai's quarters, so I left on my own accord. "I am tired and will go back to rest now." As I turned around, the Crown Prince took my hand and said gently, "Where is the Crown Princess going?" I asked in confusion. "I'm going back to my room to sleep." "Then I will go with you. Tell your master, if he's sick, he should see the imperial physician. I can't treat illnesses, and my presence would be useless." The Crown Prince flicked his sleeve and then led me away. For the entire month, the Crown Prince stayed overnight in my Zhongsue palace every night, not once visiting consort Bai's quarters. Yet everyone knew the Crown Prince favored consort Bai. Lady Bai was originally a palace made by the Crown Prince's side. To marry Lady Bai, the Crown Prince pleaded outside the Empress's palace for a full day and night before finally securing her the position of a consort. But now, has the Crown Prince shifted his affections to me? I was grinding ink, lost in thought. Completely unaware of the Crown Prince's actions, the Crown Prince wrapped his arms around my waist, rested his chin on my shoulder, and gently kissed me. "My beloved consort, what are you thinking about? You seem so lost in thought." I was somewhat startled. How could the Crown Prince be so frivolous? After all, this is the study, not a place for someone who should know propriety and integrity. My face flushed with embarrassment, and I was at a loss for what to do. My personal maid, Xiaoyao, came to report, "Consort Bai has taken her own life. Please, Your Highness, go and see." I quickly pushed his hand away and probed, "Your Highness, would you like to go check?" The Crown Prince lost interest and said sternly, "No, whether she lives or dies, it's up to her. Since I married into the Eastern Palace, Your Highness has never visited the concubine. if something happens. Outsiders will surely say I am jealous, and the public's criticism will drown me. I am willing to accompany your highness to visit concubine Bai. The crown prince was stunned for a few seconds. Deep in thought, then said, all right. He casually took my hand and called out, someone, prepare the carriage. Moonlight Palace. Consort Bai was holding a white silk ribbon, threatening to live or die, with palace maids and eunuchs gathered around in a flurry. Let go of me, I don't want to live anymore. The crown prince doesn't want me. What's the point of living? I walked to the door with the crown prince, while Consort Bai was making an even bigger scene. Kicking over the stool and waiting for the crown prince to save her, I had thought the crown prince would surely be anxious and take action, but he did indeed move, only to walk over to a nearby chair, sit down, and watch coldly, as if watching a play. I had no choice but to sit down as well. Fortunately, a quick-witted guard cut the white silk, and Consort Bai fell to the ground, saving her life. The white consort cried out, how can the crown prince be so heartless? It's only been a month. And you've already forgotten me. Disregarding my life and death, she lay pitifully on the ground, her face somewhat pale, weak and fragile, yet still clearly a beauty in the making. Even I felt pity for her and wanted to help her up. I think it's time for the crown prince to take action. Concubine Bai probably thought the same, stretching out her hand and calling out, Your Highness, have you forgotten our vows? But the crown prince merely glanced at her indifferently and said, Bring the person forward. I almost laughed out loud, desperately holding it in. This isn't a play, lives are at stake. The crown prince's men brought the person forward and forced him to kneel. This is a man dressed in peculiar clothing, with a pointed mouth, monk-like cheeks, and thin lips. His appearance doesn't look like that of a good person. He glanced at the white consort on the ground, then quickly averted his gaze. I suspect there's something going on between these two. The crown prince took out a small, delicate box from his waist and slowly opened it, holding it toward the man. What is this? Do you recognize it? The man glanced briefly and then lowered his head in silence. Consort Bai, what do you think? The crown prince turned the object toward Consort Bai, who appeared somewhat guilty, avoiding eye contact, responding softly, and pressing a hand to her chest. I don't recognize this disgusting insect. I curiously leaned out to look. This isn't a dead bug, it looks a bit disgusting and gives off a foul smell. I couldn't help but retch, making a gagging sound. Is the crown princess all right? The crown prince threw the box in front of the man, then walked over to my side and patted my back. Should we call the imperial physician? I waved my hand and said, No need. Perhaps seeing my discomfort, the crown prince gave me a warm smile, and my heart trembled slightly. Then I'll make it quick. He returned to his usual cold demeanor and pointed at the box on the ground. Consort Bai, this is the poison you planted in me. Back then, you used this GU poison to control me and force me to become your consort. I have also uncovered everything your childhood sweetheart did. There's no use denying it anymore. The evidence is right on you. The lover's GU usually consists of two worms, a male and a female. If the male worm dies, the female cannot survive either. If the female worm isn't forced out of Consort Bai's body, her life will be in grave danger. I suppose that in the previous life, the crown prince died early, likely due to the poison's effects. It is said that Consort Bai enjoyed the emperor's favor every night, receiving endless affection. Could it be that the crown prince in the previous life died from exhaustion? After all, he was physically weak, but on the wedding night, he was still quite energetic. Consort Bai suddenly deflated like a balloon, sitting slumped, but the man, on the other hand, perked up. He pleaded, It was all Consort Bai who forced me to do it. I was just following orders. Your Highness the Crown Prince, please spare my life. Consort Bai was furious and slapped him hard across the face. When you lusted after my body, was that also my command? One woman serving two husbands. What a heavy taste. I looked at the Crown Prince with disgust and instinctively moved away. The Crown Prince quickly explained. I never touched her, I swear. Moonlight Palace instantly turned into a battlefield, as Consort Bai and her childhood sweetheart began fighting fiercely. The guards rushed in to intervene, trying to pull the two apart. The Crown Prince quickly escorted me away, leaving the scene to his trusted aide Han Lin. and simply said, "Take him to the dungeon for now, await further orders." For palace intrigue, the Crown Prince and I arrived at the Palace of Gathered Elegance, where the imperial physicians were already waiting. Taking my pulse was unnecessary. With the experience from my previous life, I am well aware that I am merely pregnant. Touching my lower abdomen, I thought, in this life, I've given him a different father. I wonder if he will look the same as before. In my previous life, I only met my child once. After giving birth, I went off to battle. By the time I returned, I had no time to raise him, and then I died. I truly feel guilty towards him. And in this lifetime, I will certainly fulfill my responsibilities as a mother. The imperial physician congratulated her, saying, "It is a joyous pulse." The Crown Prince was overjoyed and generously rewarded the Zhongshui Palace. The Empress found out and generously rewarded the Zhongshui Palace. The Emperor was greatly pleased and generously rewarded the Zhongshui Palace. So it turns out this child has nothing to do with me or the Crown Prince. It's from the Zhongshui Palace. The news of the generous reward quickly reached the second prince's palace. Ivy Shun was furious, throwing things and hitting her belly. "Why are you so useless? Are you sure it's just a stomach problem?" The second prince was busy picking up the things Ivy Shun had thrown. Running around in a flurry, an antique vase was shattered, and he was heartbroken. As there weren't many valuable items in the palace, he finally lost his temper and shouted, "Stop it!" Ivy Shun glared at him. "What, am I not allowed to drop things?" The second prince immediately backed down and said timidly, "You can drop things, but not this. If your sister accidentally drops it, then wouldn't it?" He didn't finish his sentence, but Ivy Shun understood and smiled. "That brain of yours is actually somewhat useful." The second prince thought to himself, "All the ladies in the palace do it this way. I've heard it so many times. Why would I need to use my brain? Well, as long as you understand, it has been raining for a long time this month, and we finally got a clear day. Today is the day the Crown Prince meets with the barbarian envoys." But Ivy Shun came to Zhongshui Palace early in the morning with the Empress. "Congratulations, sister, on getting pregnant so quickly." Ivy Shun spoke words of congratulations to me, but her 5 fingers were fiercely gripping the white skirt. I watched her and the Empress play off each other without showing any emotion. Ivy Shun said that the peonies and herbaceous peonies in the imperial garden are blooming beautifully. "Looking at beautiful things will make the baby beautiful when it's born." The Empress found it quite reasonable, and even if it weren't, going for a walk would still be a good idea. I know, the imperial garden is definitely a must-visit. Ivy Shun also has ill intentions. Imperial garden, 100 flowers blooming. It is indeed beautiful. Let's go to that pavilion to rest for a while. As they walked, Ivy Shun pointed to the pavilion in the distance and said, "Sitting there, drinking some fine tea and having snacks while enjoying the flowers would surely be delightful." The Empress silently agreed, with the support of the peony. I walked carefully, unexpectedly. As I stepped onto the pavilion's stairs, my foot slipped. I instinctively grabbed Ivy Shun, who was walking in front of me. Perhaps I didn't control my strength well, and coupled with Ivy Shun's unsteady footing, she also fell forward. Peony grabbed hold of me, and I barely managed to stand. But Ivy Shun had truly fallen, her white dress stained crimson with blood. Ivy Shun's face was pale as she cried out, "It hurts." The Empress anxiously called out, "Summon the imperial physician." I watched coldly from the side. The imperial physician said, "Ivy Shun had a miscarriage. Since it was too early in the pregnancy, the symptoms weren't obvious, just as I expected. The moment I saw the red hem of her dress, I knew. Ivy Shun's malicious heart has finally exhausted what little fortune she had." Ivy Shun cried and said, "Zara Shun, it was you who harmed me." The Empress was furious. "Zara, do you know your crime?" I quickly knelt down, intending to argue a word or two, but the Empress shook her head at me. She said, "Today, the barbarian envoys are visiting, so there must be no more trouble in the rear palace." I obediently shut my mouth. Forget it. For the child's sake, the Empress punished me with a month of house arrest in Zhongshui Palace, which could be considered as giving Ivy Shun an explanation. Ivy Shun still seemed dissatisfied, crying and sobbing endlessly. Her Majesty the Queen told me to go back and rest first. So as not to upset Ivy-shan here, I was obedient, though I was tired of hearing it anyway. I returned to the Palace of Great Brilliance, but the Crown Prince had not yet come back. I only heard that the meeting with the envoys from the barbarian tribes did not go very well. I knew that the war to subdue the barbarians was about to begin. Confined within the palace with nothing to do, I began embroidering sachets, one stitch after another. "My lady, why didn't you say anything?" Peony brought me the needle and thread, indignant. "Clearly, someone smeared wax on the soles of your shoes." I remained calm and asked, "Have you found out who did it?" Peony was very angry and said, "The one responsible for the shoes is the new palace maid, Xiaotsue." Because she was nearly silenced, she confessed everything. "The second prince's consort is utterly inhuman. She deserved to lose her child." I was neither angry nor annoyed, and continued busying myself with my embroidery. "Keep Xiaotsue under custody for now. Provide her with food, drink, and shelter. To the outside, announce that she is dead." "Understood, master. It's late at night. Let me help you change and rest." I nodded and put down the sachet I had just finished embroidering. 5 nighttime heart to heart, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my mouth craving something to eat, tossing and turning. I faintly heard the sound of a window being opened, as the figure behind the curtain grew clearer. The intruder drew closer. I pulled out the dagger hidden under my bed, hid to the side, and prepared for a fight. When a large hand gently lifted the tent flap, I kicked him in the chest, holding a dagger, and stabbed toward him. "It's me," a familiar male voice, with a slight cough, so ruthless, that kick. Even military generals might not have such skill. I took out the fire starter, lit the lantern by the bed, and when I saw the intruder's face, I was speechless. "Your Highness the Crown Prince, why climb through the window when there's a door? Why didn't the night watch report you? The Empress ordered you confined to your quarters, so I had no choice but to climb through the window." The Crown Prince slowly approached me and said gently, "The barbarian envoy tried to poison me, but I've already captured him. The barbarians intend to declare war, and my father, the Emperor, has sent me to fight them. I will set off tomorrow." I was somewhat surprised. I never expected the barbarians to act so openly and swiftly this time, and the Crown Prince managed to prevent it in time. In the previous life, the Crown Prince died mysteriously shortly after meeting with the barbarian envoy. The Crown Prince in this life is indeed different. The Crown Prince spoke very calmly, as if it wasn't something that had happened to him. "Consort by was used by the barbarians to poison me with a GU toxin. The barbarian envoy, seeing that I was still strong and healthy, tried to send someone to have consort by administer another poison, but Han Lin caught them in time." Suddenly, he looked at me and smiled somewhat slyly. "I also discovered something interesting. Han Lin found your sister meeting secretly with a guard, and the second prince was in a maid's room." It suddenly dawned on me, so Ivy-shan's child isn't the second prince's. The Crown Prince asked me, "How do you want to handle this?" I said, "Let Han Lin keep it for now." I took out the sachet I had just embroidered and hidden by my pillow, and tied it to the Crown Prince's waist. I reminded him, "This contains the secret to defeating the barbarians. Remember to take it out and look at it before the battle." He nodded, looking at me with deep affection. I thought I would need to explain at length, but unexpectedly, he believed me without any explanation. I asked him nervously, "Why do you believe me?" He smiled and said, "I can read minds." I gave an awkward smile, treating it as if he were talking nonsense. But he believed it anyway. "But there was one thing I didn't understand. You like me." The Crown Prince chuckled. "You just noticed." I glared at him. "I just don't understand where all this affection for me comes from." The Crown Prince reached out and touched my head, looking at me with adoration. "Love at first sight. Have you heard of it?" He said that in his country, monogamy is the norm, so he would also be loyal to me. I gave a fake smile. "Li Shu. In the great Xia dynasty, having multiple wives and concubines is common. You're clearly trying to fool me." The Crown Prince smiled without saying a word. 6. Finally becoming Emperor and Empress. This battle lasted almost a year. Soon, news of the Crown Prince's complete victory in the great battle reached the palace. I also successfully gave birth to a son. The Emperor and Empress are both still alive. Ivy-shan urged several times. wanting the second prince to go to the battlefield. But the second prince was incompetent, lacking even the basic martial skills required to qualify for the battlefield. She couldn't stir up trouble anymore. The crown prince is about to return to the capital in triumph. I held our child and waited for him at the palace gate, thinking that life would be peaceful and serene. Unexpectedly, Ivishan suddenly rushed out from behind me, wielding a knife and stabbing toward me, shouting, "In the next life, I will surely be the empress." But the crown prince shielded me, taking the blow with his own hand to protect me. He said, "In that case, we're even." Ivishan was brought before the emperor and empress. I instructed Peony to release Xiaotsue and explain the whole story, meeting a secret lover, harming the royal heir, and attempting to assassinate the crown princess. Ivishan is considered beyond redemption and was executed on the spot. The second prince dared not utter a word. But I know it's not that he doesn't know how to bite, he just lacks the opportunity. Soon after, the emperor was nearing the end of his life, lying on his sickbed day after day. The second prince, with his privately trained death warriors, stormed into the imperial palace, surrounded by heavy guards. I tied up my hair, donned my armor, and led a group of soldiers, breaking through the encirclement with my sword. Without my day and night training, the second prince in this life was truly no match. When I thrust my blade at the second prince, his gaze was as fierce as when he had stabbed me in the previous life. The crown prince hurried over, looking pleased. I've seen this look in books, heroic and dashing, the aura of a strong female lead. I blushed a little and nodded at him. I know it's just that your soul has been swapped. After the crown prince became emperor, I became the only empress in the harem.